Bradley, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Bradley, first of all, tell people who you are and what you do.
My name is Bradley Tusk. I'm a New Yorker. I'm a dad. I'm most importantly a Mets fan, as we were discussing. But I do a few things. I work in politics, so I own a political consulting firm that runs different types of legislative and policy campaigns all over the country. I work in tech. I run a venture capital fund that invests in early stage tech startups and highly regulated industries. I run a foundation called Tusk Philanthropies, which is using the money that I've made to advance things like mobile voting and universal school meals and different policies that are good for New York City. I own a bookstore and podcast studio on the Lower East Side that loses a ton of money, but I still love owning it, called P&T Knitwear. And then I guess I'm a writer. I've written 3 books. I write a Substack. I write a column for the Daily News. I host a podcast called Firewall. Taught at Columbia for a long time. So.
Well, you're a modern day Renaissance man. And you're a lawyer. And you're a lawyer.
I am. I've never practiced, but I'm a member of the New York
Bar. You're a lawyer. You passed the bar.
Passed the bar.
So, Bradley, let's start with mobile voting.
Yeah.
Why can't we?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a no-brainer. But it's a no-brainer.
Right, for sure.
See, here's what I want to ask first and foremost, right? And you know this is because we're both in the universe of pros and cons, right?
Yes.
Why won't people allow you to mobile vote? What are the concerns, right?
So,
what is the lobby against it?
So there's valid concerns, and then there's the actual concerns, right? So the only real valid concern you could articulate would be security, and that's why we've spent the last 4 years building mobile voting technology. Let me walk you through it. So you would go on the App Store. You would download. You live in the city?
Yes.
So you download the New York City Board of Elections app. And the first thing they would do is say, okay, do you really live here? You put in your info, fine. Next question, are you really you? So the first thing is multi-factor authentication. So you know how, like, if you forget your Amazon password, they send you a code.
Yes.
That. Then biometric screening, so like Clear at the airport, match up your ID to your actual government ID. Okay, now we know Roberto's really Roberto, right? Ballot comes up on your screen. Ballot's super simple, straightforward. Whenever you're ready and you hit submit, 3 things happen. The ballot's encrypted, the ballot's anonymized, and you get a tracking code like if it were a FedEx package. It goes back to the Board of Elections, and they air gap it, which means they take it offline completely. And once it's totally disconnected to the internet, then they decrypt your ballot. Then a paper copy gets printed out. That gets mixed in with all of the other ballots. You know where your ballot stands because you can see from the tracking code that it was received, printed, tabulated, so on. And then the underlying code itself is totally open source, which means anybody can audit it, anybody could verify, it's totally transparent. So we've been doing this out of my foundation now, different types work around mobile voting since 2017, totally philanthropic. It's in no way a business thing, I just put my own money into it. And by the way, not meant to replace any form of voting, just give people an additional option. And so we have built that to address any potential security concerns that people will raise. But in reality, the objections will be what they can't say out loud, which is, it's not good for them meaning the status quo, right? And that's going to be, by the way, Democrats and Republicans, unions and business groups, lobbyists. If you live in a world of 10% turnout and you know how to succeed in that world, even if that world is totally dysfunctional and terrible for society, you're still not necessarily looking to change it because you're worried about your next election. But because of the system we have, almost every election is really decided in the primaries because of gerrymandering. Primary turnout is typically about 10%. And who are those voters? They're the far right or the far left or special interests that move money and votes. And so they dictate everything, right? And so either we get the chaos and dysfunction of DC or just totally one-sided governments, and whether it's the city of San Francisco on the left or the state of Texas on the right, none of that is good because it doesn't reflect how actual people feel on most stuff. Like the reality is,
most people agree
on most stuff, right? And yet you would never know that.
But they're not part of the vote, right?
Correct.
They're not part of the electorate.
Exactly.
Question: early voting.
Yes.
Big game changer.
You're great.
It's now part of the. I love it.
Yeah,
actually.
me too.
And it also allows people, right, that work multiple jobs, that work weekends or work election day, can't get to the polls. How did that happen, and why is? Because that changed the game
it did. So that for sure. Look, all these things take people who are, by the way, not just things like early voting or voting reforms, but if you just take a step back, every major right in American history, at least, it's probably true in world history too, that ever been won. The Women's Right to Vote, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the same-sex marriage, Americans with Disabilities, whatever it is, status quo never wanted to do it, but enough people stood up loud enough and long enough and demanded it and hung in there and kept fighting, and eventually it happened. And that's what happened with early voting too, and that's what we're gonna have to do here. Can you imagine a world where you have a month to cast your ballot, and instead of having to go somewhere, you can do it from your living room, you can do it while you're waiting for your coffee, on the subway, whatever you want. We had an election in New York 5 weeks ago for mayor, and Mamdani won pretty decisively.
No, don't go there yet.
Going there yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
Because I have another question.
Go ahead.
You were the architect of part of the team that sort of organized around Uber, right?
Yes.
And drivers and sort of trying to cap Uber and its capabilities and its ability to ride share, et cetera. You fought against it on behalf of Uber.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that organizing campaign and why aren't you doing the same, or who's part of this coalition?
So we are, and so interestingly, when I started working with, when you think of Uber now, it's this giant $200 billion corporation. But I started working with Travis Kalanick, who's the founder of Uber, in early 2011. Tiny tech startup. I think the conference room of my shitty little office was the Uber New York office at that point, pretty much. And we were only at that point operating in San Francisco. Uber came to New York, and the taxi industry, which is very politically powerful, immediately pounced and said to the regulators, make them go away. And we kind of evaded them for a while, negotiated, and then eventually what we realized, both in New York and in every other single subsequent market in the US, is people really liked Uber, right? When you use Uber now, you're annoyed because it says 4 minutes and it takes 7. But if you think about those first few times, it was magic, right? You're like, I can't believe this just happened. I just did this and all of a sudden here's a car waiting for me. So we went to those people and said, look, if you like Uber and you want to keep using it, you got to help us. You need to let your elected officials know. And then we built the functionality into the app so that everyone could say to their city council member, their mayor, or whoever, hey, I like this thing, leave it alone. And eventually millions of people did that, and that's how we won, right? We overwhelmed the tax industry. My strategy with mobile voting is the same thing. In fact, Travis Kalanick is part of what we're doing on mobile voting. Because in many ways, that aha moment for mobile voting was, I remember they're literally sitting there thinking like, all right, God bless these people who are doing this because they're making my job easier. But my guess is they don't actually know who their city council member is. They don't vote in state senate primaries. And they're busy. They got jobs, they got kids, they got lives. But when we made it really easy, we put it on their phone, all of a sudden things changed and they got involved. So the question became, what if they could vote this way? And that's what led to the birth of the mobile voting.
Got it. What are the conversations so far with the state legislature, governor, mayor,
so we're
city council?
starting at the municipal level, because the idea is, look, let's start local, mayor, council, school board, see how that goes, work our way up. And so we're talking to mayors and cities all over the country, a lot in Colorado, Alaska, looking at Minneapolis, Seattle, and basically, I'll go anywhere that will have me.
What about New York City?
Yeah, I would love to. So I think
those conversations haven't begun.
No, so Albany is very, very hostile to reform in general, and so if I could get a legal opinion that says I could do it through the city charter in a referendum, I think I could probably get it going soon. If I need Albany, I think what I'm going to have to do is start around New York, build up precedent, prove that it works, and then work our way in. But who knows? The other day we were sitting in the office and someone from LA reached out to us and said, can we have a conversation? So, my view is I want to do it wherever we can. Democrat, Republican, one part of the country, another, doesn't matter to me.
Brad, part of this show is part of this political anecdotes.
Yeah.
Rod Blagojevich.
Yes.
Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the election and the outcome, Rod Blagojevich. Yeah. Talk about what a personality.
Yeah, he really was. Look, he is one of the most interesting people I've ever met. And he was, in many ways, the greatest disparity of talent that I've ever seen. So from a pure retail political perspective, he's the best I've ever seen. He was better than Obama. He was better than Clinton. Look, I haven't seen the guy since I literally testified against him in trial 15 years ago. But I would imagine that if he were sitting in that chair right there with us, you'd be like, he's great, because he's so charismatic and so personable. But Rod had this view of the world that was both totally insane and yet weirdly logical, which was he genuinely believed that his job was to run for office, but then he didn't have a job again to do until it was the next time to run for office, and he didn't actually have an interest in doing the job itself of governor. And so I get introduced to him, and I'm 29 years old, I'm working for Mike Bloomberg, he had just become mayor at City Hall, and a friend of mine called and said, hey, would you like to have a conversation about being the deputy governor of Illinois? And I said, well, what's a deputy governor and why are you calling me? They said, it's the guy that runs the state. And I went out there and met with him. And I think I had a combination of different things on my resume he liked. And I think in a way, because he was such a weird, in many ways difficult person to work with, they knew they needed someone young enough that it was a career-making job for them, that I was willing to basically work 80, 90 hours a week and deal with all of his nonsense and bullshit and still keep doing the job.
Quickly, I know it was a statewide position, but
yeah,
draw a contrast between Chicago politics and New York politics.
Yeah, Chicago politics is rougher, a lot rougher. In part because in New York, look, while everyone sort of has an awareness of who the mayor is, we're the home of like so many different industries, right? You got finance, you got media, advertising, fashion, like diplomacy. I mean, there's so many different things that everyone's kind of in their own niche, right? And maybe the mayor to a certain extent cuts across. Bloomberg probably did a little more than anyone else because he also was the richest guy in town at the same time, right? But in Chicago, it's a great city, but there's not nearly as much going on. And as a result, local politics are sort of all-encompassing.
The ward
really
bosses
brutal.
actually
The ward
move a lot of
bosses had
people.
yeah, and they really had a lot. Like city councilmen here in New York, they don't have any control over operations, right? So, but in Chicago, they had say into who got jobs at sanitation, what the routes were going to be, the schedule. So they were much more operationally engaged.
Rahm Emanuel's a tough guy, and he had a rough going in Chicago.
He did.
So that says something about how it is.
No, it's not an easy place. And also, by the way, I just think in general, being an executive at any level these days, any place where there's a lot of media attention, it's just hard because you got people coming at you all day long trying to take your head off, and occasionally somebody succeeds. It's funny, now that I've worked in tech and the private sector, you know, I meet all these people who think that everyone who works in government is dumb and lazy and corrupt. And I'm like, you have, some people maybe, but overall, like running, you know, I've run companies, and running a government is much harder. Much more
or getting
complicated.
somebody elected.
Yeah, or getting somebody elected.
That is a science.
Right.
And you saw with someone who works with Uber now, David Plouffe.
Yep.
I mean, that whole delegate game was mad, the way they pulled it off with Obama,
for sure.
right? That was
for sure.
That was brilliant. There's a science to it.